I'm going to talk about something called Moltin, which is a slightly different take on how to implement an e-commerce project. I discovered it myself when looking for some sort of interesting way. I was looking at having to implement another e-commerce project, and I thought, I really don't want to have to go through the pain of payment gateways and all this sort of stuff. So I thought, I wonder if there's anything out there, and just started Googling and found Molten, and I hadn't heard of it before, and I hadn't really seen anything like it before. And so I thought maybe it would be a good thing to share with other people too. So a bit about me. My name's Drew. I do CMS sort of stuff. I run a website called 24ways.org at Christmas, where we do Advent articles. You might have seen that. I'm Drew M on most things. And yeah, my CMS product's called Perch, which is a PHP MySQL self-hosted CMS. So that's sort of me. As I said, the big thing about e-commerce is I think generally it sucks. When it comes to figuring out how to do e-commerce, your options are fairly miserable. You can have things like open source solutions which can be a bit crappy. You know, they might be implemented by a core team who are like based in the States, and if you want to do something around perhaps European commerce laws, that doesn't quite fit, or vice versa. And maybe it's just been something that's been cobbled together over an awful long time, and maybe it's got the functionality in there somewhere to do what you want, but perhaps it's not really easy to get going and you have to fight for it. You have things that are hosted, like Shopify, which can be really slick. They can be also quite restrictive in that you can't control the user experience. You have to send your customer off to a different site to do their shopping, or you have to host your site with them. The way they get things to be really slick is by restricting the number of options you've got available. They do a small set of things really well, but doesn't necessarily give you the flexibility. There's this sort of other general camp which is enterprisey and useless. You'll pay thousands and thousands of pounds, maybe tens of thousands of pounds for some enormous system which actually doesn't really do very much than the open source thing it was based on, except you get a whole load of training with it. And really you think, well, somebody made this decision and they're wasting their money. And then you get the bespoke way. You think, well, we're all developers. It's just e-commerce. I'll go and build some stuff. I can build things. But that way sadness lies, because there's an awful lot of work hidden away. It reduces, you get ultimate flexibility in what you implement, but you actually have to implement it all. And of course, all this time you're spending either unpicking an open source thing, or building your own, or in boring meetings about something enterprisey, means that it's actually diverting you away from what really matters a lot of the time, which is having a really great customer experience through their purchasing process and through the shopping process. All the time that you're doing other stuff, it's diverting you away from really great user experience. And of course, if you're going to integrate with payment gateways, if you're building your own thing, everyone done a payment gateway integration at some point? Yeah? Did anyone love it? No. Oh, hey, here we go, couple. Yeah, I mean, well, with notable exceptions like Stripe, which is a modern payment gateway which has a decent API, payment gateways are all shockingly bad. They have horrendous APIs. They're all completely different. Some don't even have test modes, and you end up putting your own transactions through and refunding them. And it's just like, it's a world of pain. So you kind of want to avoid all that. Basically, with e-commerce, it's compromise all the way down. To get off-the-shelf functionality, you lose the flexibility in your user experience. To get the convenience and ease of like a hosted software as a service solution like Shopify, you lose the seamless integration between your website and the purchasing process. To get a choice of gateway, you lose your hair. And to get things like, you know, having your website and your mobile app and your maybe an in-store point of sale all integrated using the same back end, then you pretty much end up buying something really big and enterprisey and loads of consultancy, and you lose the entire contents of your bank account. So what could the answer possibly be? Any ideas? So this is why I want to talk a bit about Molten. Molten is basically a e-commerce web service API. What does that mean? It's basically an API that provides you stuff like this. It provides you products and inventory. It provides you your shopping cart, the whole checkout process and the payment gateway stuff. It manages your customers. It manages promotions and special offers and discount codes and that sort of stuff. It deals with shipping by size and by weight and different shipping providers, orders, currencies, taxes, you name it. It's got basically API methods for all the sorts of things you need around doing an e-commerce project. It basically works like this. So you go to moltin.com, you sign up, and you create a store with them. So you say, I want to create Drew's Magic Tricks store, where I'm going to sell magic tricks. And they then give you an API key and a secret, as you'll be familiar with. You install their PHP SDK, and then you can just start building your store. So a simple composer require. They've just moved from a dev version of their SDK to a version 1, in fact of their API to a version 1. So they're versioning on their GitHub stuff's all a bit, but I think they're sorting it out now. So that's the thing you want. And then you basically start using it like this. So to create a new instance of the SDK, you do a bit of dependency injection. You pass in a request object, which is the thing that deals with actually making the HTTP request. That could be a nice light wrapper around Guzzle or something like that. By default, the one they give you is just a wrap around a simple curl request. And you pass in a storage object, which is basically like session storage or however you want to implement it. And yeah, again, the default is just wrap around PHP session functions. It's quite nice that you can just inject those in my implementation. I pass in a different request object. It does pretty much the same as theirs, but just does a bit more diagnostic logging, so I can debug things easier. So you pass those in, get a new instance of the SDK. You've then got to authenticate, which is where your API key and your secret come in. So you just pass those in and say authenticate. And then you can start building. They've got this quite nice facade style API for their SDK. So you can say things like product create, and then you pass in an array of all the properties of the thing. And there are obviously loads of defined properties, title and what have you, and you can define your own structures within it. You update by passing in its ID. Again, get and delete, and pretty much all the things on that previous slide, the products and the cart and the all the different things all have just these standard properties to get and delete and update, and you basically just work with it like you'd expect you would. Another really cool thing about it, because it's just an API, it doesn't really have any interface on it. It's just an API. You just put data in, you get data out. Because of this, they built a sort of default dashboard, which is just another use of their API. And you can download the code for it and run your own local copy, or you can use theirs. And it's called Forge. But this basically just does all the API requests that you would do in your own application. The nice thing about it is it gives you it's a good diagnostic tool, so you can see that as you're developing your own stuff, you can see that, like, if you add a product in your own code, you can see that it appears then in here and it's gone to the right place. The other nice thing about it, though, is you can forgo implementing some of the stuff that you're hardly ever going to use. Like, you might set up tax bands when you first launch the store, and you might never adjust those again, or you might not adjust them for 5 years. Well, there's no point you building that out in your application to do that stuff. You can just go into the Forge and do it there for when it needs to be done. So those little edge cases where you don't need to build stuff out, you can just go and do it through that. Also, if you're working on a really tight deadline and you're building your site and you've got like a client who's chomping at the bit to get it loaded up with their products, you can give them a login to Forge. They can start adding their products into the system while you're still building their site. so it can, you can work independently, and that of course then helps you because you've got some real data coming in. So let's talk about checkout. They say they support 50 plus payment providers on their website. I've counted about 35. So don't let their basic maths ability put you off too much. But these are some fairly, certainly aren't all of them, but these are some ones that I'd heard of. Obviously things like Stripe and PayPal, which are pretty crucial. Go Cardless is an interesting one. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They do things like direct debit payments, which is quite nice. Big people like WorldPay and SagePay and SecPay, NetBanks, remember them. And Molly, who are a quite interesting Dutch provider. I signed up for an account with Molly. Their website's all in English. You sign up and then you get a dashboard and it's all in Dutch. Good luck. So when you go into the checkout process, Molten takes care of calculating things like shipping. It does that by every product you can add. You can say whether it's a shippable product or not, because you might sell software or something that you don't actually send through the post. You can enter dimensions, you can enter weights, and then you enter shipping providers, and you can put those parameters on that. So you can say anything up to 1 kilogram, one option is Royal Mail. Anything over 1 kilogram, it's got to go via FedEx or UPS or whatever. And it weighs all that up and will pass back you the list of shipping options that are applicable to the order in aggregate, which is quite nice. Deals with taxes that are applicable, and they're working on a new version of the tax stuff to deal with all the EU VAT-MOS stuff, if you're familiar with that particular nightmare. All that sort of stuff also is applicable to people in US states who have to charge different tax depending on where you are. They handle discounts, so you can do promo codes, you can do buy X, get Y free, you can do a percentage discount, a set amount discount, all those sorts of things. Basic stuff like when you sell something, they adjust your stock level. And when it gets to a certain level, they can issue a low stock warning and all those bits and bobs. They generate orders and invoices, obviously, and they handle your gateway API interactions, sort of. So the slight downside, and it's kind of just a necessity, is they don't give you total isolation from the payment gateway. It's not a case of you can just go in and say, right, I'm using Stripe now and flick a switch and now I'm using PayPal. It's not quite that simple, because every payment gateway has its own flows through the process. Some will be where you take the credit card payments on your own site, perhaps, and then so you're passing through card numbers. Others will have pay page, where you're sending the user off to a page, and then they might get bounced back, and then you have to confirm it, and then they get sent again. And things like Stripe, you collect the token through the Stripe.js, and then you pass the token through as a card number. So they all have these little steps that are different depending on the payment gateway. But what Molten does is it gives you basically an API method to deal with each of those situations. So you're just constantly interacting with Molten's API, and it's doing the dirty work with the gateways in the background. So you don't have to dig through WorldPay's documentation in order to integrate with WorldPay. You just need to know the flow that the user has to go through and what order to fire the right things on the right URLs. So to swap from one payment gateway to another is actually possible, a lot more possible than if you'd just written your own code, but it's not just flicking a switch. It's a bit like, I guess, like using PDO. It gives you a nice uniform API across everything, but you've still got to make sure you're dealing with the right underlying structures. Business-wise, they bill you based on number of API requests, which is quite interesting. It's very reasonable. You can get a free account for up to 30,000 requests a month, which means is you can just go and sign up for an account and start kicking the tires and seeing what it's like, and in fact probably the whole way through your development you'll be able to just work on free accounts. Then once you start using more than that number of requests, and I've never managed to go over my 30,000 a month, you then pay like $49 a month for 300,000. It goes all the way up to, if once you're doing 5 million, you're paying what, about 300 quid a month, which sounds pretty reasonable to me. So there are other things. It's not just each grade of account. It's not just number of API requests. It's like number of users you can have logged into their Forge dashboard and amount of space on their servers for storing images if you decide to store images with them rather than on your own site. You know, but the API request is the interesting one. So, when might you use this? I think it's great in that it gives you almost complete control over the user experience. You just build your shop how you want to build it, and you manage the process how you want it to go, and you basically are just firing off these API requests to get the data you need and to start the processes you need and what have you. You can just pretty much build it as if you were working with something that you'd created bespoke, but you've just got a nice API sat there waiting for you already. It means that you don't need to build all the really boring stuff, like, you know, handling of SKU codes for variations and all this sorts of stuff. It's brilliant if you have got multiple consumers of this data. So if you've got a website and a mobile app, and maybe you've got a point of sale in a physical store, I think that's the real sweet spot for this sort of thing, because they can, as long as the client can issue API requests and consume API requests and JSON, then they can work with the same back end. So it enables you to deal with those tricky situations. I did a project a good few years ago for a London fashion boutique where the items they were selling on their website were on the shop floor in the boutique, and they were like one-offs. So if somebody bought it online, it had to come off the store, and if somebody had bought it in the store, it had to come off the website, because you can't sell these things twice. This really makes that sort of situation much, much simpler. Enables you to swap out your front end easily, which is a big, big draw for if you're selling projects to clients and they're doing a big e-commerce project, you're charging them tens of thousands of pounds to build this big thing. What you can do is say, well, in 5 years' time, if your website is becoming a bit old hat and you decide that you want to completely refresh it with something new, you can leave the back end, all the e-commerce stuff, that's all fine. That can be constant throughout, and it reduces the business risk and the cost of just re-implementing a website on top of the same front end. And as I said, if you're on tight timescales, you can start adding inventory via Forge while you're building your site out, which is quite a nice feature. When might you not use it? Obviously, it creates a massive dependency. If you've got a store that's based on an API, obviously with any e-commerce where you're taking payment, you're always dependent on somebody else's API just for the payment stuff. But when it's only a bank's API, they tend to be pretty stable because they were launched in 1990 and have been running ever since. That comes with its downsides, of course. But you have got this big dependency. You have to say, well, what if Moltin go out of business, or what if they have an extended period of downtime? All their servers are based on it's all on Amazon's infrastructure, so Amazon would never go down, right? So you have to weigh up that sort of stuff. Obviously, that is a risk. There's a risk of Moltin not continuing. I think they're actually I think 3 guys. They're based up in Newcastle. They were part of this year's Y Combinator intake, and they're just going through that process now. But it's just such a solid business prospect of, here's this fantastic service that they're charging money for right out of the back. So I think it's probably a fairly good bet. Obviously, it introduces network latency into a lot of your operations. If you're adding something to your cart, that's an API request that goes off, and then when you retrieve the cart, you're having to make the API request to get the stuff back, and so it's introducing latency. I say it's based on Amazon. Maybe if you put your stuff on Amazon too, then perhaps that reduces some of that. and obviously it's not going to be as flexible as something completely bespoke. If you have a really wild requirement, the system isn't necessarily going to cope with it. But what I found is because it's just sort of PHP and you're making requests and getting data back, you can layer your own functionality on top of that fairly easily, which is quite nice. So that was just a whistle-stop tour of sort of what it is and when you might use it. And I don't know if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
What about generating products on the fly? So, for example, if somebody, I don't know, like moo.com, where they got business cards, so somebody wanted 77 business cards or something.
Yeah. I guess you could do that. I don't see why you couldn't do that. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. You just create what you need to create through code, and it's suddenly there, and you can
just have
add
infinite stock of a particular type, wouldn't you really?
Well, no, I mean, like if there was customization, multi-tiered customization, it would be impossible to have all the permutations.
Yeah, I mean, there is an awful lot of flexibility for handling permutations built into it. One of their examples is a pizza ordering system, where you have your base and your toppings, and you can build together from the product variations your pizza and then order it. So it has got an awful lot of flexibility in that regard. But yeah, I don't think there'd be anything stopping you, because everything happens programmatically. So if you decide to programmatically create a product, well, fine. So I think that'd be fine. Tim?
Do they store all the product details on their servers, or do you store them on your local, like pictures?
It's kind of up to you. They will store pictures, and they have this fairly flexible, like sort of key value system for storing almost any data against almost anything in their system. Or you can just store it yourself.
Because you say you can set up the shop through the Forge before you actually go live, but that's doing a storage on their servers, huh?
It's yes, and yes, that would, and that wouldn't give you your custom stuff if you wanted to add custom stuff to it. In my use, I've gone for a sort of hybrid. I handle all my images and everything, and extended product information myself, and just put the core of the stuff onto Molten. So product titles and brief descriptions and things, I stick on that, and then keep everything else on my side. So it's kind of like a hybrid, and you're free to choose how you do that, I guess.
Have you ever had a situation where a challenge where you're trying to maybe evaluate two different pieces of data, i.e. they only have like core data on their server, like joins, for example, right? Trying to retrieve two joins, etc. If it was all on your own server, but half of it's over an API and half of it's on the server, have you had that?
No, I actually, in my own stuff, I cache everything locally anyway, and do all my product display from local copies, so that I'm reducing that network latency, so I can just be faster, because that sort of thing bothers me. So I've not come across that. But because you're pretty much doing everything on your site, and you're considering Molten storage to be almost like a dumb back end, apart from where it comes to checkout and calculating all your totals and things like that. So yeah, I've not come across a situation like that.
So during the life of a customer entering the site, how many sort of APIs calls would you expect them to be making just to add a product? If they're loading the page every time, are they having to pull back the current basket from the remote site, or do you keep it locally? And then
it's kind of up to you. So they actually have a JavaScript API, a JavaScript SDK as well, which a lot of people use with things like Angular.js, and when they're building out, they're just like completely JavaScript-based front-end stuff, and that is doing everything with API requests. Doing something with PHP, you can quite easily cache the number of items that are in the basket and just invalidate that cache every time something's added or removed from the basket. So it's kind of up to you how much you keep live and how much you cache, I guess.
So it could vary from potentially a couple of queries or API calls to potentially several thousand, depending on how much you actually do the caching.
Definitely, yeah. There is a on their site. There's a calculator thing that tells you about how many page views on average they think you'll get for that number of requests. But it's always going to be playing it by ear a bit, I guess. And I try and keep the number of requests down because that's what you do when you're using an API, right? You keep the number of requests down. But I think you don't need to worry so much about keeping the number of requests down for cost because the cost is so inexpensive.
Latency is...
It's more latency and just like being a good developer, right? Yeah.
Are there two API endpoints, one for exporting and one for eventually reactive events, as in subscribing to things that happen on their side and they push back to you?
There are webhooks, yes. So you can you can listen for stuff happening. So if you've got a point of sale in a shop that adds or reduces a stock level, you can have that. You can listen for that webhook on your website and adjust your local caches, invalidate your caches, or something like that. So you can be notified of every change that happens as well via webhooks. So that's quite handy.
And the export, like if I really want to migrate?
Well, because it's just an API, you just get the data you want and do what you want with it. Yeah.
What about when people are searching for products? Is that delegated to them?
Yes, they have their own search stuff, which I haven't actually used yet. I don't know how good it is. I think there's always the option of whacking everything into Elasticsearch as well and doing it that way. But yeah, they do have their own search stuff. Who knows?
What about that situation where you have one item to sell, and someone has it in their basket, and then someone comes to the site to try and buy that? Does it help you with that sort of situation at all, or is that something you have to cater?
I guess it would, because it would fail at the checkout process. So it's just then how you handle if you've added it to your basket when you go to checkout, it would check the stock levels at that point, and presumably it would fail out at that point, and you just make sure you handle that request elegantly.
I really like the direction they're going in, and kind of sticking the finger up at the other e-commerce platforms that have got shoddy APIs and making sure that's the key to their platform. So it teaches Magento a thing or two. But the fear is, because like e-commerce is orders of magnitude more complicated than just a CMS. There is so much work to do to kind of replicate the process, even if they're kind of handling certain levels of it. So clearly they've already built the admin interface or a demo one to use. I'm sure within time they'll build a front end sample interface. Do you feel that then they're going to end up in a similar position as everyone else, with kind of core things that people start with, and then they're in a mix of open source and commercial combination?
I don't think they'll go down the front end, because their whole thing is being an API. So I don't think they'd have. Maybe, who knows? But yeah, their whole differentiator is that they're just an API. So maybe.
It'd be interesting to see people start developing front ends specifically for that API and selling that as a product.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that's what I've been doing with Perch, not to sell, but as a shop add-on for Perch sites. We're just integrating with this, so you can build out your store and manage it all within your CMS. So your clients can just manage all their products and everything all within that. So that's how we're using it.
What's the hardest challenge you've faced using this?
I think just for me, it's been keeping everything in sync, because I'm not just delegating everything to the API. I'm trying to keep stuff local and reduce my number of requests. The big challenge then becomes making sure that my data is really fresh, but I'm not then excessively refreshing it. And it's like the 3 hard problems of computer science, isn't it? Or no, 2 hard problems of computer science is cache invalidation, naming things, and off by 1 errors.
Sorry, one more thing. You said you're baking this into your CMS.
Yeah.
Do you need a login for your CMS and a login for this as well to have the two login situation?
Only if you were going to use their dashboard.
Right.
But all their dashboard is basically is an API client. So we'd ideally replicate everything. So you effectively build your own dashboard. Their dashboard is just kind of a convenience and is convenient in a lot of ways. But you can do everything through the API, so in theory you shouldn't ever need it. Yep.
How does it compare to BigCommerce or other equivalent solutions?
I don't know. I've never heard of BigCommerce. Yep.
I was just going to ask, how far along is the purchase implementation?
We're in beta at the moment, so it's, yeah, soon. Yeah, I mean, it's functional. We've got, I'm not sure if I can say, but we have a customer with a live site for a fairly big organisation at the moment on the beta, and it's fine. So, we're fairly far down the line. Yeah.
Documentation, is it good, average?
It's plentiful. They have about 3 versions of the documentation for different stages of their API. It's always a challenge, documentation, and I think it's a particular challenge for these guys. There's lots of stuff there. It's not always accurate, but it's usually very quick to find out why something's gone wrong. Like things I run up against is they recently, in the version 1 of their API, they pluralized all their API endpoints just to make them all consistent. So fine, but they didn't update the docs with all those changes. So you try product, and then you realize, oh no, it's going to be products, and so you hit up against stuff like that, which is annoying, but isn't disastrous. Generally, the documentation's fairly good. Certainly better than my documentation is, so I can't complain. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much.